So we just talked a little bit from a trauma theory perspective about what is trauma, how does it occur, what are the symptoms or coping strategies. And then we talked about how your nervous system needs to discharge in order to return to baseline. And this video is the first set of tools for discharge. We're going to talk a little bit about the breath, why it works, what are the neurological and physiological benefits of conscious breath. So, check this out. Imagine, actually let's go ahead and do it together. If you put your hand at the back of your head, right here where the skull meets the neck, that's where your brain stem is. So the brain stem is the part of our brain that governs all of our autonomic function, like breathing and heart rate and temperature and digestion and mating impulses, all of these sort of non-voluntary or automatic functions. And so breathing typically comes here out of the back of our head. We're not going to forget to breathe. I actually have a friend, and when she was little, she was terrified she would forget to breathe at night, so she would practice her breathing. But we know now, like you're just gonna keep breathing. Now, if you put your hand at the front of your head, right here on your forehead, this is the prefrontal cortex or the neocortex. This is the cortical region. And this is the part of our brain that's associated with cognitive functioning, executive functioning, higher level thinking, rumination, self-reflection, determining if your behavior is appropriate given the stimulation, temperament, personality, creativity, like all of the really cool, juicy stuff that makes us us. So, although the breath primarily comes out of the brainstem, we have the capacity to modify our breath. In fact, as far as we know, and there's a lot we don't know, but as far as we know, we're the only animal where breath is both automatic and neocortical. Let me tell you what I mean. You could inhale, hold your breath, and then dive underwater. When we intentionally modulate the breath or modify the breath by doing certain breath practices, we take ourselves from the brainstem back up into the front of the brain. And this is an oversimplification, but for all intensive purposes, after someone has overgone a traumatic incident, if they live in a place of chronic stress, the connections between the midbrain and the front of the brain begin to get severed. And when someone does these conscious breath patterns, it reconnects. It begins to reconnect these severed places. It's very cool. And again, that's an oversimplification, and in further videos we talk a little bit more about what's really happening there. But what you need to know is that a conscious breath literally gives a trauma survivor or someone who's in chronic stress access to themselves again. It helps them get back up here. It's extraordinary. So let's talk a little bit more about the neurological and physiological impacts of the breath. I mean, it's amazing. This intervention is free, right? Like, it's our birthright. It's the first thing we did. It's accessible to anyone, and it's really effective. So it's neocortical. It gets us back into the front of our brain, where we get to choose how we want to respond, right? That mom who's at the grocery store and she loses it with her kid, if she was able to get back into the front of her brain, she would have access to choose. Because when we leave the front of our brain, we go into these more survival-oriented aspects, and we're not choosing, we're just trying to survive. That's where a cornered dog will bite the hand of someone they love, right? So by helping someone get back to the front of their brain, they have an opportunity to choose more of who they are and how they want to respond and how they want to be in the world. It's a wonderful resource. So the conscious breath does a lot of other things. It also increases heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is the marker of resiliency or adaptability, how quickly we can come back to baseline after stress or overwhelm. So if you put your hand on your chest and you start to slow down your breath, you'll probably feel your heart rate start to slow down as well. And then this is optional. You can totally opt out if you want. It can be a little activating for people. If you put your hand on your heart and you amp up your breath, you'll feel your heart rate picking up. So the heart rate actually mirrors the breath pattern. When our heart beats, the heart beats, and then there's a space, and then the heart beats, and then there's a space, and then the heart beats, and then there's a space. And all of those little spaces in between the heartbeats, they're not static, they're not fixed. If, for example, each space in between the heartbeat is on average 1 second, perhaps the first space is 1 second, 0.02. And the next space is 0.98 of a second, right? There's a variance, there's a plasticity. So when we modify the breath, we start to modify the heart rate variability, right? We're increasing the plasticity, we're teaching the heart rate to move in a more plastic way. Because after trauma, after chronic stress, or in old age, the heart rate becomes more rigid, right? And the more plastic the heart rate is, that indicates that the person is more quickly able to come back to baseline after a stressful or traumatic incident. So like, check this out. The car outside backfires. You startle, and then there's the startle response, and then there's the orienting response. And in those few hundred milliseconds, your body's gone into the stress response, which means that your pupils dilate, your heart rate increases, norepinephrine, cortisol, adrenaline, they're pumping through the system. And you're primed for an all-out fight or flight. You've left the front of your brain, you've gone back into these more survival-oriented aspects of the brain, and you're ready to respond, right? And so heart rate variability is the measure of how quickly, after the stress response, you can come back to baseline, right? And when we do these breath practices, we teach the heart rate more plasticity. We increase heart rate variability. We help the system be more adaptable so that it can more quickly come back to baseline. It's really important to mobilize and respond to danger, but it's also really important to be able to come back to baseline. And if you live in a place of chronic stress, which most of us do, I mean, driving a car is kind of like flying a jet. Pulling out your phone is kind of like having a computer in your pocket. I read a statistic, I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but it sounds right, that the average New York Times has more words than a medieval monk would read in his lifetime. It's a lot of sensory input. It's pretty overwhelming for our system. So the stronger our heart rate variability, the more quickly we can come back to baseline. We can come back to rest and digest after we've been stressed out or overwhelmed. More benefits of the breath include that it's a direct pathway to the nervous system. So every time we inhale, it's fight, flight, it's sympathetic tonus, and every time we exhale, it's rest and digest, it's parasympathetic, right? So every inhale is sympathetic, fight, flight, and every exhalation is parasympathetic, rest, digest. So we can utilize certain breath practices intentionally to regulate the nervous system. This is super cool and very simple. So I'll tell you a few breath practices that you could utilize. Breaths for hypoarousal, and hypoarousal is when someone is stuck off. They're kind of flat affect, spaced out, zoned out, tired, dissociated. Breaths for hypoarousal are breaths that activate the system, and we can do a few of them. So I'll show you some of them. Inhale and exhale. So that's one breath. Here's another breath. You can inhale, inhale, exhale, exhale. You can do it with me if you want. Another breath would be this 3-part breath. So it's inhale, 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 exhale. Last one. So all of those breaths are activating for the system, and they're really good if someone's stuck off, if you're really tired, if you're spaced out, if you're zoned out, if you're a little dissociative. In fact, I feel my system's a little more active already. My heart rate's increased as well. And then there's breaths to address hypoarousal. So if someone walks in and they're super stressed out and they're anxious and they're nervous and their system's tense, and you want to support yourself in down-regulating, here's some breaths that would help that. So any breath that extends the exhalation will be beneficial in addressing hypoarousal, because again, remember that the exhalation is parasympathetic. So down-regulating by extending the exhale. So 4, 7, 8 breath. Inhale for 4, retain for 7, exhale for 8. So we can do it together. Inhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Retain. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you would repeat that. Another breath that's really good for addressing hypoarousal is alternate nostril breathing. So you can plug off one nostril, inhale, plug off that nostril, exhale, inhale, plug off the nostril, exhale. And you would repeat that. So you're inhaling from one, exhaling from the other. Inhaling, exhaling. And sometimes if people feel like their sinuses are a little bit clogged or congested and this is hard to do, they can even pull the cheek over a little bit, creating more space in the passageway. So the last breath I'll show you, this is one of my favorites. I'm a trauma therapist, so I utilize this breath quite a lot. If someone comes in and they're really activated and you ask them to down-regulate immediately, that can be a shock to their system and can further dysregulate them. So if you meet them a little bit in activation and then support them in coming down, it can feel safer to the system. And this is really like the work of being a skillful human. How do you scan, notice what's actually happening in space, attune to present moment reality, and partner and meet that, both within your own inner landscape and the landscape around you. This is our invitation. So this breath is my favorite for inviting me to do that every day. So what we do is we take short little sips of breath in and then ride an escalator down. Feels really good. So you feel free to try all of these on. And then in the show notes, what we'll actually do is we'll list out, there's a huge amount of research on the benefits of neurological breathing. For example, it literally changes genetic expression. It rewires the brain. It changes the telomere caps at the end of the DNA strands. It impacts inflammation markers. I mean, it's amazing. And we have a research team at BodyWise that reviews peer-reviewed research and makes sure that the research we're citing is really good. And we'll have a list of the current benefits of breath. And it's a long list. It's quite comprehensive. So feel free to take a look down there. And if you'd like more tools for discharging trauma, you'll see how to access those in the show notes as well.